antidote. There is no antidote. There is no antidote. There is no antidote. There is no antidote.
We live in an increasingly uncertain world of fires and floods and the devastation of our own actions. Climate change isn't coming, it's here. And we're forced to ask what sort of world is coming in the future. If we could travel forward, would we find ourselves in a wasteland? Or perhaps an endless cityscape? Or will we learn to make room for nature, even as all living things are forced to migrate? We may not have a time machine, but we can predict the future of now. Or rather, Rob Dunn can, and does, in his book, The Natural History of the Future. To determine which species can survive and thrive, Dunn takes a good look at islands. The natural ones, but also the unnatural islands we've created. How do species migrate between them? Can we provide corridors to connect islands of nature? Our cities provide a type of island-hopping corridor too, especially for the very small, from pigeons to rats to viruses. The future can make room for the migrations that matter, but so much will depend upon what we do right now.
Whoa. Okay. I did it, you guys. I went to the future. I got a time machine and I went to the future. It was amazing. It's also not good. Things are not good. I see in the future this tension. It's almost like if we don't do something right now, things are gonna get really bad then. But don't worry, because there is a few things, anyway, some things we can do now, and I know someone who can tell us all about it. Davey, what have I missed in the now while I was gone?
What you missed in the now was me trying to explain this book to Maggie, and I had a complete brain meltdown moment. I was trying to explain to her about the parasites and like bacteria and parasites, and I was like, the little things, like the tinier than bugs, like the really small. For the life, I texted her like the next day, and I was like, it was bacteria. I was trying to say bacteria.
The mini bugs, the mini
Yeah.
tiny. I missed all that, and see, but the future, it's really interesting because we know somebody who can do natural history of the future, and it's just like he got out of a time machine too. So I think we should welcome Rob Dunn.
Welcome, Rob.
Oh, I love the smoke, but I love the claymation more. I want more claymation.
I'm working on next year's. Yes, it's a whole thing. I literally start designing sets after I do the first one last year. It takes me this long to get it done. So it has been really exciting reading your book, and it just so happens that you are in the future right now. You're technically in tomorrow.
I am. I'm in Denmark right now, and it's tomorrow. It's like 1:05 tomorrow. So I'm very excited to be here, but I'm also marshaling my inner earlier in the day person.
Well, it's really wonderful to have you, and it's funny. Normally, we do our announcements and then we jump into questions, but we have a first question to start us off, which is great. And while we're asking this question and doing announcements, a reminder to all of you: you want to be on the live version of the chat here on YouTube, and you are invited to ask questions. Please make sure you're asking us questions. We want you to. It's good. It's actually the best thing that we have going on. So, Kristen Meston asks, we have read science books by journalists. Why is it important your book was written by a scientist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so I think I mean, we need both kinds of books. They potentially do slightly different kinds of things. And so one of the kinds of things I can't do is I know lots of gossip about scientists that I would love to write about, dramatic stories of
Right.
wonderful and terrible people. Um, and if I was a journalist, I could do that with very few career repercussions. But because I'm a
Right.
scientist, I have to wait till I retire. And so there's some things you don't fully get. Um, on the other hand, one of the other things that I try to do in a book like this is to think about what are we not seeing across fields that's sort of
Mm.
invisible because it's stuck at the interface of ecology and evolutionary biology and architecture. And then also to work as a scholar to do some of that work. And um, in some ways, that's not so different from what Ed Yong or Carl Zimmer or Mary
Mhm.
Roach might do when they're linking things. And so it's a blurry line between the two. But it's also the case that the kind of science I'm bringing into this, it's my daily life. It's what I think about
Right.
every day. I work with people
Mhm.
who think about it every day. And so maybe I have the advantage of being just a little bit more privy to that world of things that are slightly invisible.
Yeah.
And some of that is not just about what scientists publish, but what they privately think. I
Mhm.
think that becomes pretty germane to the future because a lot of that private thinking doesn't ever make it into our broader discussion.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
good question.
It is a good question. I'm it's a little bit it's not quite the same, but I'm a historian, and when historians do history, it's different than when journalists do history too. And it is there's a language difference too, frequently,
Mhm.
I find. And not that obviously we need to translate to a public audience when we're scientists or academics or whatever, but we translate it differently, I think, if you start off if the field is, as you say, germane to yourself. So that's very cool. So thank you. We have some other questions coming up that I've starred. Again, you guys continue typing questions. I have a question I want you all to think about, and I asked this partly on Facebook, which is I know I have seen changes in animal behavior and animal migrations and based on climate change just in my own lifetime. And I'm sure we all have. We all live in very different places. Some of us are. Susan is in Texas. We've got different people from different areas. So I'd love to hear what other people think about the changes they've seen too. But first, announcements. What do you think? Somewhere there they are. So we have some announcements. Davey's going to put some links in the chat as we go. It's really, really good to have you guys here. Please remember, again, I try to reiterate this, sometimes I forget to. You can type us questions. This is the best part about the show. And I later always find people going like, oh, but I didn't want to ask my question. Yes, you do. You do. Trust me. It's no dumb questions. Only, we'll help you flesh them out, even if you don't know quite what you want to say. But next announcement, we have I always forget what my next announcement is. Oh yeah, Patreon and VIPs. Okay, guys, it is live now. Good. After dint of effort, the new newsletter is live. So if you've been following the show but you haven't been on the newsletter list, you should join because that's how we send our links. If you want to support us and be a Patreon, you can join us in Patreon and for $5 a month, which is not too expensive. And we'd love to see you there. That gets you access to VIP only shows. In a way, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here because we have most of you here tonight are VIPs. So, but the Patreon is monthly. Don't worry, I'm still doing the annual membership drive. It's coming up. So next is that the cocktail next? No, Spread Shop. Oh, yeah, that's right. You can still order our merch through Spread Shop. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can decide what sorts of styles you want there. It's kind of handy, but it all has our logos and whatnot. So yay. Next up, oh, Susan Ballinger just got here. She's like, my email went to trash, but she's here. She's made it. We were just talking about Texas and we can talk about T-Rex later. The cocktail of the evening, which I actually finally made. Kat is our drinks maven. She comes up with these recipes. They're pretty amazing and awesome. This one is called, and they vote on the names, by the way. The win was Fall of Humanity, but it is very fall-like. We've got sage and there's like black pepper involved and cayenne pepper. I cheated a little bit. I had some habanero maple syrup. So instead of doing cayenne peppers and maple syrup, I put that in there. It is so much hotter than I thought it was going to be. So you guys can watch my face as I drink this if I start to turn bright red. But yeah, there's muddled sage. It's great. It was in the newsletter that was sent, and it is also up on Facebook. So please, by all means, join us there. Next, David, what's next? Oh yes, YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. There are so many more of you who exist than are actually subscribed there. It helps us out, and you get access to all the shows, which is super fun. I see Rebecca Gibson says she's drinking a Black Lily. I don't even think I know what's in that. You might have to clue us in. Okay. The next, yes, the Peculiar Movie Club. Davey, take it away.
So those of you are probably wondering, hey, Davey, didn't you say that Bride of Frankenstein was coming out on August 31st? Well, unfortunately, me and Darren could not get synced up last month to actually record it. But we did watch it, and I'm still going to do probably a solo episode, maybe even tonight. Who knows? After this is over. But you will get the Bride of Frankenstein episode, which, goes back to Reva's book from last time and connects with Golem Girl. I did watch it, and we were talking about it before, how it's amazing how the movies from that time period still hold up so well and are gorgeous movies. So I'm looking forward to talking about it with you. I'm working on a movie for the end of the month with our fiction book that we're going to be reading coming up soon. So I'm looking for a spooky cowboy story. So we might not be in the mainstream when it comes to spooky cowboy, but I actually have a modern one in mind that might work with witches and cowboys.
Nice.
It's going to fit very well with our 2nd September book.
I do like it. Here's Kat, by the way. This is our lovely drinks maven that we have to thank. This is really good. Kat, mine's really hot, but it's very good.
So I've been growing my own habaneros and my own jalapenos, and I did not realize how hot homegrown peppers are compared to store bought.
That's quite interesting, isn't it? Rebecca says, so this is the Black Lily, lime juice, Cointreau, Fernet Braca. Oh my gosh, I've got all that. Sour, bitter, herbal. All right. I will take note. Susan, I'm sorry, Susan. That's sad. And we didn't have a mocktail this time. We usually try to. Amanda says she's got a Hell's from Offset Beer in I don't know if I pronounced any of that right. In Park City, Utah.
Sounds like a microbrewery, yeah.
The microbrew. So it's like microbes. That's how you can remember, Davey, whenever you can't think of the word. Microbrew. Microbes. Problem. Yes, I love it. Okay, fantastic. Yes, it is hot. It is Kathleen. It is. Maybe I should have stuck with the cayenne. So yes, those are all of our announcements this day. And Kathleen says, don't worry, next one is very mocktail friendly. So we're going to come back to our usuals. Oh, that's right. Amanda, you are the microbrew maven. I always forget that. So back to the show.
Speaking of things getting hot.
I've got another question lined up, and again, I really want to hear from you guys about the types of things that you personally have seen change, climate change wise. Kristen says, did you ever get to meet E.O. Wilson? Stoplight typing, don't do it, kids. Yeah, don't type while you're driving.
Well, first I want to observe that Kristen's typing while driving is like the punctuation is flawless. And so
amazing, isn't it?
Rapid moment. It's several times. So part of my disciplinary background is originally as an ant biologist, and so I met him several times in that context at Harvard, where we would go to identify ants, and he would sit back in a corner, and you could go visit him. I also met him in Tennessee when I was a postdoc, and I was in charge of getting him to his talk, and got him very lost, and was responsible for him being late to his own talk, which was not a proud moment. But I met him a number of times.
Well, we're going to start without him, though, right?
No, it didn't start without him, and he gave the same talk always, and so it also didn't really matter in lots of ways. Brilliant thinker, but there were only so many talks.
Right. Interesting. So I think the ant stuff is amazing. I think ants are very interesting, and every time I say this, though, I'm reminded of the fact that we're not talking about aunts and uncles. which is where my mind goes immediately. It's an autism thing. So I just see these tiny little ants, like these little aunts and uncles, like they're very small and they're marching. But I do think ants are amazing. I kind of am curious. This is my question. How did you get from there to this? Because that's a very small thing, to a book that is so wide ranging. I mean, I know we talk about small things in this book, but we also talk about huge concepts.
Yeah, it's a good question. So early on, I sort of shifted from both studying ants and the species that live with them and humans and the
Mhm.
species that live with them, and those two
Right.
kinds of societies that you can study in different ways. But I was also very much always interested in,
Mm.
how do we think about these societies while thinking across disciplines? So what do they look like from an artist perspective, from a chef's perspective, from a historian's perspective?
Mhm.
Uh, and I realized at some point that, I was an okay lab scientist and okay field scientist, but I was pretty good at pulling these ideas together that span those disciplines, or that were not, were being held up in one light, but not moved to the sort of neighboring
Right.
concept. And so as I went through my career and I sort of had more and more freedom to think big in that way, and I kind of specialized on making those connections.
Yeah, I really value that. I think that's what I'm best at too. Though from a historical perspective, which crosses over with a lot of other things. I was a historian. That my area of study was medicine. So I'm a historian of medicine and science in that way. One of my books was on the history of manufactured power, for instance. And I do think that there's a way in which, if you yourself are a multidisciplinary thinker, and I sit between, like, among three disciplines: anthropology, history, and literature. It kind of gives you that ability to see around corners a little bit, doesn't
Mhm,
it?
mhm.
You go, oh, I see what's on the horizon there. Seeing around corners is, I like that. It makes me sound much more super, don't you think? Um, so I'm seeing a lot of answers to this other. So let's talk a little bit about the concept of migration and climate change. I know that wasn't the only thing that this book was about, but that was the, like, part for me. I, like, really honed in on that idea of movement of species and changes in species that we see. And so I just I asked the peculiars, they're going to pop up with a couple of these that they've come up with, and I'd love to hear your comments on them. One, Rebecca talks about a lot more pollen. She feels like the trees are producing more pollen. Kathleen says she feels like her spring allergies have now turned into summer allergies. Like, the seasons for certain kinds of pollen seem to be changing. Do you think that that's true?
I mean, like big picture, if we just step back, so as climate changes, species are moving, they have to
Hmm.
move. And like one of the oldest concepts we have in ecology that's a really robust one is the idea of the niche. And so you think
Hmm.
about every species around you, every species has a set of temperatures and precipitation and seasonality that they
Right.
like, and in which they can thrive. And so eventually, as climate changes, almost all species are going to have to move as those conditions change.
Hmm.
But at the same time, when they're in a given place, as the seasons grow longer and they shift around,
Hmm.
their biology changes.
Right.
And, you know, big picture in general, what's going to happen is that things will get earlier. So summer starts earlier,
Yeah.
summer
Lasts
lasts
longer.
longer.
Yeah.
But one of the
Susan
things that
Ballinger.
happens is, how well species track that depends on how they measure
Hmm.
the season.
No,
And so
right.
if they
Okay.
measure it by temperature, so like the number of hot days, in essence, is what some species do, then they're likely to respond really directly. But if they're
Hmm.
using different cues, they do different things. And so you can see
Right.
this kind of behavior of trees or fungi or whatever,
Yeah.
where they don't seem to do what's making sense. And often that's because
Sometimes.
like they can't read what we've done to them. They're like, I think it's summer. Like it's not right. I'm gonna go ahead and make pollen.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. Well,
confused. I'm gonna use all the pollen now.
right now, I want to find someone's nose, and we're just going to get in it.
Yeah.
Um, and here in Cleveland, we had some unusual weather this past year. It was a very mild summer. I'm sorry, a very mild winter. A very mild winter where it just didn't get that cold. But then we had an incredibly cold snap. And a lot of the evergreen bushes. So I have boxwood hedges, and the boxwood hedges normally they they sort of pull back some sap. They do some changes to themselves when it's going to be a cold winter. They didn't do them. So then when the cold snap hit, it just killed like so many boxwoods. Like
Yeah.
there's just dead boxwoods all over town and dead evergreens because they weren't prepared. It was like mild, 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 die in winter, mild, and that they don't, not every species can go like, okay. And the deciduous trees actually fared better because they were already, tucked away and all that.
One of the things that we don't talk about a lot is that as climate changes, what we often mention is the average condition. So on average, it will get this much warmer in 10 years or in 20 years. But we
Mhm.
also know that the variability is also increasing. And so it means that
Yeah.
those extremes come far faster than the change
Mhm.
in the average does. And so one of the things we're seeing with that, and less so with trees than with animals, is that
Mhm.
it favors the species that are able to deal with variability.
Right.
And so like if a species can deal with that cold snap and then a hot snap, it's doing okay. If it can't, it's going to suffer this year, even if it could do okay in 10 years, because
Yeah.
it can't deal with that
Right, because they don't actually
variability.
live. I love average temperatures because 'cause they're like, "Well, the average temper." I'm like, "But we don't live in average temperatures."
No. Yeah, we live in really
It's
hot days,
math.
really cold days. Yeah.
Susan Ballinger earlier, she said, "I live in Florida, and it's the temperature of the surface of the sun right now." Amanda
Mhm.
Johnson was saying, the thing that I think about most is how the snow amounts have changed. She's in Utah. So we used to have so many more snow days and winters with feet of snow. And this is true in Cleveland too. And now it's quite rare. Like I didn't even get to ski last year. And I live in Cleveland where snow is, and I'm close to New York. Like there, I should be able to ski, but nothing doing. She said last winter was that way, but that's the first time that it's happened in at least a decade, probably longer. And I know last winter was record setting in a bunch of states, right? They suddenly had a bunch of snow and there's snowpack, and that's good, but it's also very strange. Bonnie said she saw white Christmas stats for places, for various places. A white Christmas is about half as likely as it was when she was a kid. So it's it's pretty nuts.
I think one of the things for us to collectively remember too, as we see these changes, is that we can actually predict a lot about what's going to happen in response to them. And so it doesn't need to be some features will be surprising, but a lot of it we know is going to happen, and so it's useful to be ready for it. And so I
Yeah.
saw that Amanda was talking about tree and other plant pests seem to be so much more prevalent.
Hmm.
If
Yeah.
you're in
Yeah.
if you're in the Midwest, we've been predicting that since 1970 or something, 1980 anyway.
Right.
Um, and so not only do we know what they're going to be more prevalent, we know which ones. And so it means
Hmm.
farmers need to be ready for those pests, and they can be. And rule of thumb, think about I could tell you for every city in the U.S. what city your city is going to be like in the future. And if you
Yeah.
know a little bit about what that city's like, you can anticipate some of that change and
Right.
plan for
Right.
it.
Yeah,
Uh,
and you can plan for, like you said, the overall upswing. It's just you can't you can't necessarily like I don't know what I'm going to wear tomorrow, right? Like
yeah,
it's quite the swings are quite large.
yeah,
Amanda Johnson also mentioned tree sex. We had this whole conversation with trees having sex with your nose thing in a different show. It just happens that we go down these. So she had to was just reminding us look for that tree sex episode. Very funny. Um, Bonnie brings back too, she says she doesn't even like to think about it as climate change. It's like climate extremism. Everything just does stuff with more drama. Big
mhm.
rain, bigger rain, colder cold.
Yeah,
Oh,
for sure. And I've just been at a meeting this week about the future of food, and
mm,
one of the things that was being discussed there was this idea of a green transition. How do we move to more sustainable food systems? And in some
yeah.
ways, it's a moment when we need to make change pretty quickly. We're going to have more people to feed, and we have to do so while using less
Yeah,
energy and while emitting
right.
fewer greenhouse gases.
Of
But
course.
if we look historically, at the dawn of agriculture, it was a time of extreme climate change when people were radically innovative. And so there were all
Yeah.
these partnerings with different animals and different plants. And there's
Mhm.
Primo Levi has a great short story about a centaur. And in it, he describes the moment when all these hybrids came to be. And the dawn of agriculture is kind of like that because human cultures were hybridizing with these different
Mhm.
species. And I think this current moment calls on us to think about what are these new relationships with other species that are going to help us be more stable with these extremes.
Right,
And
right. Because we are always sort of searching for stability in some ways, and a center. I'm always like, yeah, I feel like I want that. I'm always trying to like, even when the way you garden, I'm like, okay, I need to try and balance. I've got to have the plants that are going to grow in the heat and the ones that are going to not die if it's swampy, and because I never know what the weather's going to do. But individual people can only do so much by yourself. Like it's
Mhm.
got to kind of be a community organized event.
But I mean, very similar to that. We know both at like the local field scale and at the level of countries, if you plant more kinds of crops, those crops are much more resilient to change and resistant, in
Yeah,
part because the odds that some of them are going to do well increase. And so if you look over the last 30 years, there's a great study that shows the countries that had more kinds of crops were much less likely to suffer from climatic changes that have already happened. And so when
absolutely.
you're talking about what you're doing in your garden, it's actually very
Yeah.
parallel to what we can do at our state level, country level to buffer some of that change.
It's true. There's a whole conversation happening over here about the colder cold, icier ice. Says Kathleen, and then Rebecca said, sampled intro to Under Pressure rings in the distance. Seriously, on the ice, more freezing rain. That's true. We've had a lot more freezing rain and things like that. It's hard to keep up with what's actually going on. Those of you who are new, if you're new to the show, what happens in the comments, it's like Vegas over there. It doesn't all make it into the show, but there's some good stuff over there. Amanda is talking about the grasshoppers. We've seen actually quite a lot more grasshoppers this year too, and I know that is a species that goes in cycles. Actually, is it not?
Depends where you are. I mean, farther west, Mormon crickets have had an outbreak this year. I don't know what you're in
What are they called?
Cleveland-ish, right?
Mormon crickets?
Mormon crickets. It's not a religious
Mormon
comment.
crickets.
It's just a spe- species
Okay.
name probably needs to be changed. But um, but but we do see. I mean, in these weird years, it's one of the reasons you see more outbreaks of individual species is oh yeah. So for Amanda, it might be the Mormon crickets. Uh, but one of the things you do see. Thank you
Oh,
very
that's what
much.
they are. Oh my goodness.
Oh, they're
What are those?
grasshoppers,
Those
not
are
Mormon
very.
crickets here.
She had
Yeah.
those. Yeah, yeah. But look at that thing. That's a. Hmm.
But the
That's
other thing we
interesting.
know, and so whoever's Googling, if you can Google camel cricket.
Oh yeah, that's Davey. Davey's fast on the Google. Those of you who are listening on the podcast miss some of Davey's amazing ability to find the things that we're talking about in real time. I think the most amazing one was when he found the cordyceps eating the cordyceps ant that time when we were talking. There we go.
Oh yeah, so this is good. So oh, and one of these is actually one of ours. But so we did a study a number of years ago where we were studying the biology of things that lived in houses to think about what we want in our houses and what grows there. And we were engaging citizen scientists, and it was a time when like we weren't being fast enough with sharing data. And so we asked a question: do you have camel crickets in your house? And camel crickets are really cave crickets that moved into basements. And we asked people, where do you have camel crickets? And we got hundreds of responses in the first day. And we looked at the responses, and they were clearly wrong relative to the science. And what scientists always assume in that moment is like, oh, the public doesn't know what a cricket is. And so then we asked for pictures, and it turned out that what has happened is that two Japanese camel cricket species, and the one in the bottom left and then the bottom right
Okay.
are for sure that species, moved into houses across North America, basically unnoticed. And they're the size of my thumb. And so this was just absolutely nuts, because here's like a thumb-sized thing that had invaded North America and like really totally without anybody paying attention. And to me, it was a remarkable moment because, if we're not paying enough attention to the giant crickets in our basement, there are all these other changes that are happening around us that we're not very clued in on. And so that's the other
Hmm.
piece of this is, and I write about this in the book, that we often know more about general rules, what's going to happen in general, than we do about a specific, that specific grasshopper, because there are so many species, and the odds that any particular one we've studied in detail are pretty low. Current estimate is 8 million animal species and 1 trillion bacteria species. And so, that's hard to have all the details, but if we can keep an eye on sort of general phenomena, what in general tends to happen, it's often helpful.
Okay, that's
I
really.
could,
Do you?
I could say as someone who grew up in basements, like in Northeast Ohio, we hang out in basements. The general
do.
rule was just like, we know the world down there belongs to them. We try to pretend that they're not down there.
You're like,
it's their world when the lights go off.
It's also
you sort
when
of
we're
thump
like,
on the
as
wall
a
before you turn the light
biologist,
on.
I thought everybody would be so excited because they're pretty beautiful species with these long antennae, and the dominant response was like, well, how do I get rid of these immediately? And so our response to that was that we thought, well, what use do they have? Which also is a biologist, frustrating question. But so we decided to work on what use could they have, and we found bacteria in the gut of one of the camel crickets from my house that can break down the waste of the paper industry, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so here's a species we didn't notice. We pay attention to it. By paying attention to it, we're able to find a use for it rather immediately.
What about those ones? The ones with there's so many legs, but they walk like this. I hate those things. Like
so many legs.
Oh,
house
like
centipede.
silverfish.
Millipede.
House centipede thing. I don't. That's what we call them, but I think it might be. I think they might be called
like in waves. They move
like
in waves.
Undulating. Yeah. It might be a house
centipedes.
centipede.
Nobody studies them.
Nobody studies those.
No, a lot of those species moved into houses in Mesopotamia early in the Western settlement, and then moved with us around the world, but don't get studied.
So, okay, that's a silverfish, right? So that's a house centipede. Okay, so a house centipede, not a silverfish. We've seen silverfish when I lived in the countryside, but these house centipedes, I am not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid of spiders. I hang out with snakes. I'm friends with yellow jackets. We're good. But those things creep me out. I am convinced that they ate our young when we were small mammals. Like, I think somewhere back in history, they were our enemy, I think. But what I want to know about them, what I want y'all to study is how do they go from being this big to being this big in like 3 weeks? What are they eating down there?
They eat a lot of roaches, actually. They're kind of
don't
roach
have those.
specialists.
Or maybe that's why I don't have
one
them.
tie-in back to the book on this topic is, that when we think about species moving, I can almost keep a thread. I'm a little tired on the thread at this time.
You're good.
Species will have to move with climate change, and it's easier for them to move if we create corridors of their habitat. So if you are, if you are a wild cat species that likes tropical forest, and we create a connected patches of tropical forest, it's easier for you to move to track your preferred climate. So that's been known, and that's been a focus for a long time. But what's been sort of unnoticed but clearly predicted from that same literature is that if you take any habitat type and connect it, the species in that habitat type are going to be able to move. And so one of the weird quirks of the world we've built is the species we've made it easiest to move for in the future with climate change are species like those camel crickets or
the house
centipedes or Norway rats.
So
or
I'm gonna have to learn to like them, I guess.
So we've connected our urban environments and made it easy for those species to move, which is like the opposite, I think, of what most of us, we want hummingbirds to move, not Norway rats, but we created the other world.
And we want kittens and things like that, bumblebees. So I see there's some more questions coming up, which I have singled out here, but it is the half point in our show. And at the halftime show, we do a little musical number, and I apologize. We don't actually have a video for this one. This is a group called Echo Astral. They're new to us, but we have the audio for them, and Davey is going to cue that up. When we come back, we're going to do the author quiz, ask our final questions, and then release you to sleep, probably. Music. So that's a new one for us, Echo
Yeah.
Astral. I liked it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of
I thought it was
unique. We
kind of
haven't
fun.
had a sound like that yet on the show.
No, no, we haven't. I'm hoping to have them come back again next year, or next season, where we will sort out the video thing. That was my fault for not clarifying that to them. Before we go to the quiz, I did just want to pop up a question that Manda Johnson asked about the C-section part. So she says, I'm at the C-section part of the book. Do you think these findings will affect how many choose to have C-sections, or will we find other ways to introduce the bacteria to C-section babies? And you might want to give us just a little bit of a background on that, so that for anyone who's not there yet.
Yeah, that's a good question, Amanda. So the background is that in the last decade or so, there were hints of this going back to 1890, but in the last decade, it's become much clearer. We've realized that the first microbes a baby gets for their gut microbiome come from the mother during vaginal birth, both from vaginal microbes and from mom's fecal microbes. And that's really key to stabilizing that initial gut microbiome. And it's then changes a little bit through time, but some of those microbes stay with you for life. The other thing we've started to realize is that babies that are born via C-section sometimes get some of mom's microbes from her skin and from nursing or just from being next to the body, and sometimes develop totally normal gut microbiomes. But if they do, they're getting them from different places. They're getting them from dog feces, they're getting them from other people in the house, and sometimes they acquire what are basically hospital microbes. And so there are a bunch of health outcomes that are more variable for C-section babies. And so going back to Amanda's question, one of the things people are for sure working on is storing parental microbiomes to pass on to the babies in the event of a C-section, or in the event that the baby just doesn't acquire the microbes that it needs. And people are also working on very commercializable, patentable individual microbes that you'll get dosed with. Expect those to be very widespread, offered by your doctor, and medically questionable for the first 15 years. And then the other thing, going back to Amanda's question, is like, what does this do to C-sections? And first thing I'll say is, like, a lot of C-sections are just medically required and save lives. And so, part of our collective job is to find good solutions for those moms and babies. But then a lot of C-sections are what's the word? They're optional. People opt into a C-section when it's not medically required. And so, I guess it's a social, cultural, psychological question of whether this recognition changes what mothers do. And last thing I'm going to do is second guess moms and birth practices. But
it reminds me.
It is clear we need to find ways. Yeah, go ahead, Randy.
Oh, I was just going to say, it reminds me of so when I'm Gen X, so in Gen X, like, they circumcised all the babies. They were like, oh, it's just cleaner this way, and that's completely not true. Like, I mean, there's reasons that we have that fold of skin, and if you take it off, that's fine. I mean, my brother is circumcised, is perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with it. Davey, you're Jewish. So
Yeah,
you've
didn't
got
have
that.
much of a
But
choice on that one.
yeah, you have a choice on that one. But I mean, but it was just like, they just didn't, like, they barely asked my mom. They were just like, this is a thing we do. And she was like, oh, okay. And so I think that's really interesting. I sometimes wonder if mothers know they have options. There's a sense that sometimes there's a kind of a pressure
For sure.
to do, to do the surgical thing, I think. So yeah, that was a fact. My microbiome doesn't work for shit. So
Well,
I wish I had picked up better ones.
Amanda Johnson talked about the poop transplants for C. diff. So everything on the Peculiar Book Club is cyclical. So we already learned all about fecal transplants, and we did a whole book on poop. It's a great episode.
Yeah, we did a lot of poop. We did poop and sex for some reason a lot last year. We did. that was a theme. Not quite sure why. But now we're doing futures.
I mean,
futures, and
they're pretty central biologically. I mean,
you kind of need them.
I think it's been a theme since the origin of animals.
Yeah. I mean, well, and of course, some animals have a cloaca, which we learned about as well, and they get it all done in one place. Anyway,
Including beavers for reasons that are not clear.
what?
Yeah.
I didn't. Oh, how did I not know beavers had a cloaca? I'm like the cloaca master. No, that's not the right way to say that.
I'm not looking up those images. We'll have to
Yeah,
use our
you know what? Let's go to the quiz, Dave. Hmm.
Well, the quiz is in a way about animals this week. So you told
I'm
us
just going to
about.
point out for the record that we made a strategic turn on the phrase cloaca master.
Whoops.
Yes, we did. So you told us all about the robot bees and how they were using them to pollinate fields and stuff like that, or at least they're trying to come up with ideas to let them pollinate fields. And so that got me thinking, what other robot insects are happening out there right now? So the quiz this week is called "What's All the Buzz?" So I'm going to ask you about 3 different robotic insects, starting with scientists at MIT are working on robotic lightning bugs, which can communicate with each other through light and make the tiny robots easier for researchers to see in the field. And the article shared how they had a ton of benefits. What allows the tiny robots to light up? Is it bioluminescent luciferin chemical particles? Is it electroluminescent zinc sulfate particles? Or is it C, photoluminescence hydrogen gas particles?
Ooh.
And here's
So
only
am I
one-
answering? Is that who's answering?
You can. So the peculiars can help you out, though. Honestly, I can't see how any of us are going to.
I'll have you know,
But yeah,
one of these answers is right, and the other 2 I had a lot of fun coming up with the fake answer for.
Okay, so now all we really need to know is Davy's psychology. So Kristen says C, Amanda says C. I feel like we have a scientist in the room. You probably know more about this than we do.
Well, I mean, I'm going to go with the idea that if they're making them like lightning bugs, that they might use the same chemistry lightning bugs use, which is the first one.
Okay. That seems very smart to me.
Keep going with A. The answer is electroluminescent zinc sulfate particles.
Oh, that's boring.
They're able to somehow they're able to get them onto like these strips weaved into the little lightning bug you see there in the image. I know. My made up ones were more fun. All right.
I'm sorry. That is okay. So first of all, we had up here because I said my whole what did I say, cloaca master. Amanda asked if that was the new absolute unit, which has a whole other story. The absolute unit appears in most of our shows. But I will say that the best answer to one of Davy's quiz questions ever is that answer is boring. I love it.
All right, question number 2. Researchers at Japan's Riken Thin Film Device Laboratory are creating cyborg insects where they can actually remote control the insect's movement, with which Madagascar insect? Is it the Madagascar hissing cockroach, the Madagascar giraffe weevil, or the Madagascar Acreoptera manga?
Okay, so I know they have hissing cockroaches, so at least
I will tell you, all 3 of these insects are native to Madagascar. That is not the
Okay,
trick
okay.
of the trick question. Yeah. So this is the actual
it's a
insect, by the
dystopian
way.
horror novel.
So this gets tricky because a friend of mine has created remote control hissing cockroaches, but he's not in Japan.
Okay.
But this is
so I
this
know
is
that
actual
they exist.
this is actual
Okay.
3D pieces attached to the insect. This is
Yeah.
So is you making like a little Gundam wing? Is that what you're doing? Like a little Gundam cockroach? Is that?
Well, the idea is like if they can then send them into disaster zones that they can detect things that humans can't get to.
Oh God, that just sounds very cockroachy to me. Wait, what's an manga?
I'll look it back up again for you.
Your friend must be great at parties, Rebecca says. Rebecca Gibson is one of our authors, by the way. She's been on the show for her own books. Hissing cockroaches have a good carapace for attaching things to. This is a very smart thing to say, Kristen. It is a hissing cockroach. Look at that thing. Researchers, I love it. Okay, so it was A then. But what's the Archaeopteryx?
Oh, did I do that? Oh, I advanced it.
You
The
did,
answer
that's
is A.
okay.
It was hissing cockroaches. And there is a little picture There's a picture of the little cockroach. And yeah, so apparently they can send electrical signals into their abdomen to make them go left or right. Like they literally remote control them.
Do you
So,
suppose the
all right.
cockroach is like, I suddenly feel like I need to go over here, but I don't know what.
Let me see. I think I might have to take the quiz out. Let's share my screen here,
Okay,
and
so
let's
what
show
is
you
a
what the manga looks
Archaeoptera
like.
manga? I mean, I'm expecting it to be black and white cartoons, but I guess that's probably not right.
Nope, it's a little stick guy.
Oh, it's a stick. Now, it
Yeah.
seems like you ought to be able to remote control that guy because he doesn't look real to start with.
He looks fun.
He does look fun. Some of them have wings. I like that. I like the blue one's
Oh,
quite nice. I would wear him like a necklace.
okay.
All right.
Um,
Sorry,
I
back
don't
to
know what I
quiz.
did over there. I was typing things on the screen. All right, let's get back to the quiz. Question number 3, your final question. So you talked about robotic bees, but robotic honeybees aren't just being used for pollination. If researchers can get them to work in tandem and eventually as a swarm, they might be used for what task? Weather manipulation, home security, or collective transport of heavy payloads?
Let's see.
I'm gonna wait for the comments to appear on this
Okay,
one.
let's see.
I mean,
Bonnie says,
imagine your
just because we
neighbor.
can, maybe we should.
Imagine if your neighbor is like on the back porch and they're playing really loud, obnoxious music, and it's like
Oh,
1 in the morning and you're trying to go to bed. Wouldn't you like to send a swarm of robotic bees to chase them off their
I
porch?
actually tried to send my actual bees as a swarm, but they didn't buy it.
I'm
A lot of people are
There's a lab that
suggesting anyone.
has now figured out how to train robotic bees to do bee waggle dances and tell bees where to go.
Oh my god!
But it appears that sometimes the bees understand and just don't care.
They're like, you're not a real bee, so no.
Yeah, like I know where
apathetic
you're
bees.
telling me to go, and I just don't feel it.
Amanda Johnson, you'd want wasps. Well, actually, so I'm a beekeeper, and one of the things I notice about my bees is it kind of does. You have a bunch of bees doing waggle dances at one time, right? So it's the really enthusiastic ones who tend to win. And so I had this one little bee who was just like, she was like doing the Macarena like every day. She was just really excited. I feel like she was probably, she. Okay, sorry. What's the answer?
So, what was your final guess there, Rob? Sorry, in all that chaos.
Oh, I'm gonna go with well, I think there is a project to do sneaky. Well, of my choices, let's go with home security.
It's going home security. The answer is collective transport of heavy
What?
payloads. Yeah.
No.
If you can get them all to fly together, they're quite strong as a swarm. So right now they're working on them flying in tandem. So like carrying like a string between them and flying in tandem. But if
Okay.
they can
If
get
my
up to
next
swarm,
Amazon package is delivered by swarm,
you never know.
This sort of goes to that chapter of the book, which is there are like some more obvious things we could be working on behalf of the people of Earth.
But what would we have to quiz you about then?
That's a good point. It's true.
how heavy, Amanda John? I know, me too. I'm like, I would like you to take my child to school.
Heavy. We're
Heavy.
talking heavy.
That's ridiculous. Okay. Wait, I had a thought and it is now gone because I am just thinking of all the things bees could carry. So I've lost all the integrity with which I was going to. African swallows. Yeah, coconuts, African swallows. I was wondering when Monty Python would show up.
I mean, Lady
Oh,
Paws
funny.
might be out of literal drones, yeah. Lady Paws might be out of a job. You could just send your drink upstairs via bee
Oh my gosh, you're right.
swarm.
You're right. He's
Deliver
actually
your
not
drink.
here, so I had to carry my own drink up here. That I could get bees to do it for me. Man, we're slacking. I feel like there's something else I was supposed to do during the show tonight, but my mind is now blank and thinking only of bees. Help me out, Davey. What are we? Oh, we had another question. That
More
was what it
questions?
was.
Yeah, more questions. Toss it back to
Sorry.
the
Yeah,
audience.
that was what it is. Oh my gosh. Well, way up here. We got a lot of mileage out of that old hissing cockroaches thing. Oh my goodness. There was another question. Who is mowing? It is nighttime. Sorry. Kristen message. She said, I did the Fitzpatrick map for Seattle, and it's a damned if we change, damned if we don't situation now here. How do we get people to change if things are still going to get rough no matter what?
Yeah, it's I mean, I think the psychological and cultural aspects of climate change are immense, and that we've not taken them seriously enough. In North Carolina, where I live, people are moving to the coast in record numbers at the same time that houses are literally falling weekly into the ocean.
Yeah.
I just saw an ad for an Airbnb that's now like in the water, and all the people that offered reviews are like, it's amazing. Like you can hear the ocean underneath the room. So the question of how we motivate people, I think, is complex and difficult. And, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about now is not just what's happening in well, I can't remember where the example was, Washington, Seattle, maybe. But a lot of these consequences have a version that's in Seattle that's somewhat extreme. But what's happening in like the Sahel of Africa is so much more extreme.
Right.
The Sahel stretches along the bottom of the Sahara, and models right now predict it becomes a zone that's really marginal for humans to live in. And it's also this border zone for cultures. And so what those models have predicted is that would be politically unstable. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is country after country has undergone coups across the Sahel.
Yeah.
And so, I'll pose the question back to the group, which is, how do we think about convincing people, not just to make change because of their backyard in Seattle, but because, the lifestyle they're living is impacting people at huge scales across the Sahel right now and elsewhere in ways that are going to ramify around the world. And to me, that's one of the most important questions we can be asking is how do we engage those conversations in ways that make people make change?
Well, one of the things I liked about your book, which I do not see in a lot of so much that I read and watch about climate change makes me feel so hopeless that it's hard, that it's not exactly motivating sometimes. You feel like you can't make a difference. But I thought reading your book, it was very obvious that there's things we each can do in our own lives. And also, not just about sharing information, but even planting native species in our backyards. I mean, there's little things that each of us can do, and I felt like your book was much more hopeful than many that I have encountered before. And the fact that it was written by a scientist made me feel like that hope wasn't fake. Where sometimes when you read it, you're not sure. So you're right. It is so difficult to get people motivated about some things. At the same time, some of that motivation is going to happen anyway. I was watching a show on tornadoes where Tornado Alley, which is sort of Texas Great Plains, and there's another sort of tornado alley, they call it something else, that runs along the south, are now one giant, like they used to be separated by a safe corridor, and now they're not. It's just been pushed together. And so at some point, the town of Mayfield, my brother used to live in Kentucky, and the town of Mayfield in Kentucky, which never had tornadoes, was just wiped off the map 2 years ago. So, I think we're very bad about conceptualizing our harm to people, countries and countries away, but it's starting to come home to roost, I think. And I think as we start to know people who are suffering, I hope that will make a difference.
I think too, one of the things I try to practice some days more than others is to think about how do we work toward examples of bold change. And so not to imagine you have to change the entire world yourself, but that you can offer an example for what a bold change might look like. And so we're pulling together people in the spring, led by Aaron Seacamp, who I have the pleasure to work with at NC State, and to get people from the governor's office, from local communities, from climate change research programs, from transportation sector to come together and figure out, what are our possible scenarios for Eastern North Carolina, and what does it look like to collectively build toward the best of those scenarios, given what we know is happening.
Yeah.
And
I
so
think that there's more
and
people
that's
motivated than used to be.
I have a role where I can work at that scale, but we all have scales we can work out in our lives. And, what does it look like to be the bold person in your community? And you don't have to be, the change you make can be small, and yet you're modeling that change you want to see more generally. And I think that makes a
Yes.
big difference.
I think that is a wonderful place to end our show tonight, because one of the things that matters a lot to me is that we are the Peculiar Book Club here. We're a community, and we do come together for mutual support. And I think that it's empowering to remember what we can do on our own, and in our spheres, to be, as you point out, the person who can make change. But I also just want to say to all of you, if you haven't bought the book, or if you haven't finished reading the book, this is an amazing book, and Rob Dunn's doing amazing work. And so I would hope all of you will support him by buying A Natural History of the Future, A Natural History of the Future, which I keep putting a the up there. You can get it at our local bookstores, but you can also get it at your own local bookstore, and you can pick up copies. I believe it's an audiobook as well. So please do buy the book and support people like Rob, who are doing the kind of communication to the world that really matters, and is able sometimes to reach people that we ourselves might not be able to. So thank you so much for being here, Rob. Thank all of you for coming. It was absolutely fabulous. It was a great show, and we can now send Rob off to a well-deserved rest after a very long day. So thank you again, joining us at a place where, if you're weird, you're family.
You got the blue bottle blues when you wake up in the night. Don't make a big mistake, 'cause you can never make it right. When you reach out for the vial, feel the ridges in the glass. It's a matter of survival, baby, better watch your back. There is no antidote